Tech Talk. Tech Talk. Tech Talk. Tech Talk. Tech Talk. Tech Talk. Stem cell therapy is a hot topic in the science community, and I caught up with a UNSW biomedical researcher, Guy Fenton. Now, Guy talked us through these new exciting developments that's happening in the world of stem cell therapy.
Stem cells are cells that exist in our bodies actually, and they have the ability to do two things. They can either turn into other stem cells or they can turn into more mature cell types. So stem cells can also be found in embryos. Embryonic stem cells are sort of what people hear of more and are more familiar with that term. And embryonic stem cells can turn into pretty much any cell type that we see in our bodies. But the stem cells that actually exist within our bodies, they can't turn into any other cell type. Depending where you find them, they can turn into a limited number of cell types that are normally related to the area you find them. So if I found a stem cell in my blood, those stem cells can turn into blood cells. If I find stem cells in my eyes, there are stem cells in your eyes that can turn into other cells that our eyes need. And the main function of stem cells, especially the ones in our body, is to repair cells as we get older in age with sort of newer functional ones, and that's sort of like a natural repair system for us.
A new development that I've been hearing around is something that stem cells can play a big part in muscle building. How big of a part do they actually play?
Yeah, we sort of, scientists discovered that there are stem cells in muscle back in the 1960s. And only recently in 2011 did a research group realise the full necessity of stem cells in our muscle. So they conducted an experiment in 2011 that showed if we got rid of these special stem cells in our muscles would just shrivel up and die. So these stem cells are called satellite cells or muscle satellite cells. And whenever we use our muscles or there's trauma to our muscles, maybe we've been lifting heavy weights or even been in a traumatic accident, stem cells in our muscles are needed to regenerate muscle tissue that degenerates or gets injured in certain situations.
And if anyone was interested out there in, bodybuilding and fitness, is there a way to harness this stem cell generation to achieve maximum muscle?
Yeah, we can, and it's really cool because my lab group, we specialise in looking at the neuromuscular system, and we study it to try and develop mostly treatments for particular diseases or conditions that affect muscle. But the more that we've learnt about the function of muscle and the physiology of it, we've learnt that you can actually perform exercises naturally to improve the health of muscles instead of using medical interventions or drugs to enhance your muscle health. You can do it naturally. So there have been some studies that have recommended resistance training as the best form of exercise, and resistance training it's just the best way to sort of inflict damage upon your muscles in a way that stimulates stem cells. So whenever I'm lifting a heavy weight and I can tear my muscle tissue apart, it's the satellite cells, the stem cells in your muscles become activated in response to that. And it's in that way that you can increase the strength and sometimes the size of your muscles. Depending on other activities you're doing in your training, you can increase the size of your muscles, and there's a lot of guys that aim to do that particularly, so hypertrophy training regimes, and essentially just need to lift heavy weights. And there's also a particular style of training called eccentric exercise or eccentric contractions. So this is where if you lift a weight like a biceps curl, you might want to have a friend actually push your hand away from you as you try and lift the weight. And that causes the muscle to stretch while you're contracting it, which sounds a little bit counterintuitive. But effectively, when you're contracting a muscle against a force like that, a pushing force, it causes an eccentric contraction and causes the muscle to break down more than a normal contraction would. And an eccentric contraction has specifically been shown to stimulate satellite cells more than just normal types of muscle contractions that most people would be familiar with.
Do you think it will ever be possible to trigger these stem cells into becoming new muscle without having to work out?
It is possible, certainly, to stimulate satellite cells without having to work out, and that's sort of one of the missions of a lot of researchers today, because there are diseases that affect muscle which cause it to degenerate, and one of the sort of influencing problems in a lot of muscle diseases is that satellite cells aren't performing properly. So one of the most sort of severe family of muscle diseases are called muscular dystrophies. And quite recently, scientists realised that, one of the problems behind this disease is that the satellite cells start to run out in this disease. So muscular dystrophies are mostly genetic, and they're characterised by continuous degeneration and regeneration of muscle. But the muscle never actually ends up regenerating. It mostly just starts to degenerate slowly over time. And muscular dystrophies are a real problem because they affect people from a very young age, mostly young boys, and they have an average life expectancy of only 25 years. So a big mission for researchers and clinicians is to find a way to stimulate satellite cells to help muscle regenerate in these sort of conditions. So one of the best long-term strategies for this will be to develop a stem cell therapy where you can actually inject stem cells into muscle, and if they're of a healthy origin, so if the stem cells can behave in a healthier way than the diseased cells, then that will offer a long-term treatment for these particular patients.
You said it was a long-term goal for scientists and researchers to develop a medical treatment for the muscle diseases. If and when this does eventuate, do you think it'll cross over to the sporting world and then be used as a form of cheating?
Yeah, it's a really good point, Phoebe. It is one of the issues that's now sort of facing anti-doping authorities around the world and federal regulators, is the fact that these therapies that are initially aimed to treat medical conditions could now be used for athletes. And the question is, well, are these therapies sort of trying to help a recovery process, or are these therapies now performing enhancing strategies? So where do you draw the line? So at the moment, there aren't a whole lot of stem cell therapies that are legalized yet that will really help with your muscular performance. But there have been some reports of using actually stem cells from our blood and inject it into a joint. And there's been some claims that that can improve the function and recovery of, say, tendinitis, or maybe you've had a ligament sprain in the joint. So stem cell therapies involving blood, so blood cell transplantations, that's really the only main legalized stem cell therapy at the moment today. Although in 2011, actually, a therapy was legalized called platelet-rich plasma therapy. This is basically where blood can be taken from an athlete or a person, and it's treated in such a way that it concentrates a lot of growth factors in the blood. And when you inject the blood back using platelet-rich plasma therapy, you could inject it into a joint space. That can actually take an effect on stem cells naturally in the joint already and cause them, stimulate them to regenerate and help a particular problem. So platelet-rich plasma therapy is quite a widely used therapy now around the world, particularly in athletes. Again, there aren't really regulations yet on athletes, on how much it's going to help them in sport. But I think until there's more evidence behind the true effect, and if there's a consistent effect with these therapies, they'll be able to then form more concrete guidelines on what sort of therapies can be or can't be used when it comes to athletes and performance-enhancing strategies.
And what other uses for stem cells have researchers discovered or sort of harnessed and refined?
Stem cell therapies are being, there's a lot of research into their use for a range of conditions, mostly conditions that involve degeneration. So it can involve the nervous system, damage to the heart muscle. So if you have a heart attack, there's a lot of research going into how we could use stem cells to sort of improve the quality of our heart muscle. One other aspect of stem cells is the fact that even stem cells in the body, they're sort of limited in what cells they can turn into. But researchers a few years ago now, only maybe 2 years ago, realized that you could actually take stem cells from the skin and reverse them in a way, or treat them in a way that they could actually turn into any other cell type in our body. So there's a company now, a French-based company called Cellectis, that do this, and they freeze stem cells, and this is called a stem cell bank. So it's really only for wealthy people now. If you can afford it, you can actually get stem cells taken from your skin and frozen in a stem cell bank so that in the future, when methods for delivering stem cells into the body become a bit better and can become legalized, they can actually use these stem cells for future treatments if they need it. And that's a big area of personalized medicine that we'll be seeing maybe in the next decade or 2 decades, the fact that we can have our own stem cells frozen and then used for whatever medical conditions come up in the future.
So this idea of freezing stem cells for future use sounds completely fictional and something out of a movie. What part of that whole entire process isn't legal?
The fact that we can freeze them is legal. However, the problems come when you have cells or anything put back into you, especially in the US. At the moment, there's a lot of rules on how you manipulate cells once you take them out from the body. So at the moment, cells have to be minimally manipulated. But in the future, perhaps we might actually be able to genetically modify our cells, for example, before we inject them in. The biggest sort of hurdle at the moment for putting cells back into us is the method of delivery. So is it safe? Is it efficient? Are those stem cells actually going to get to where they're needed in the body for them to take the effect that we expect? And of course, that's really important. Clinicians aren't going to adopt these therapies unless they know that there's a body of evidence for the safety and efficiency of them.
Are there any human trials for these stem cell therapies?
Yeah, there's a lot of trials going on. All research trials start off in little animals like mice, and then they slowly progress to human trials. So there are human trials going on, and if you want, you can actually visit the Stem Cell Australia website. Discusses what sort of clinical trials are going on at the moment across many different stem cell therapies. So as I mentioned, it could be for the heart, for muscle, or for the nervous system. So there are trials going on. So yeah, you can check out the Stem Cell Australia website and find out more information on what sort of trials are going on today.
That was Guy Fenton, a biomedical researcher at UNSW. If you want to help with stem cell therapy research, you can log on to saveoursons.org.au. Save Our Sons is a not-for-profit charity organisation which raises funds and awareness in helping find a cure for muscular dystrophy.